Howdy mates, good morning, or good late morning I should say. How are we all doing? It is officially Wednesday, September 8th, 2021, and you might be wondering, where am I? Well, as it turns out, I'm actually over at Boca Grande, or that's like the name of the town, but I'm technically on Gasparilla Island, which is actually one of the largest barrier islands in this area of Florida. So we're actually specifically at the Gasparilla Island State Park, which hosts the famous Boca Grande Lighthouse. However, though, I may mention that in a separate video. But basically, we're at the southern tip of the island. And at the southern tip, this is where it basically meets up with the Charlotte Harbor, that's to my left, and it will eventually flow its way into the Gulf. And just look at this. So if you look straight in front of me, like where that boat is passing through, or pontoon, you can see how there are many opposing currents. There's currents going towards the south, there's currents going towards the north, there's currents going to the east and even the west. So basically in all of the cardinal directions. So just as a piece of advice, if you ever come out here, you want to avoid swimming in this particular area, just because pretty much based on experience, the land or the coastline, you go out far enough, literally it just drops all of a sudden, like the surface that you walk on that's on the water, it basically just sinks, just because there's just so much water passing through here and turbulence. So it really doesn't give much opportunity for any sand to settle. Now, essentially what we're looking at is an example of an inlet, a natural inlet at that. So this was not by any means man-made. I mean, I'm sure there's been some modifications, you know, like state parks adding sand to the coastline and then adding some rocks that I'm standing on as well, just to slow down that rates of erosion. Because really, if none of that maintenance was done, it's bound to happen that we wouldn't have this beach right here. It would most likely be receding even more. And that was actually a thing that happened back in the 60s. Sand actually had to be brought here to basically help restore that lighthouse, because at one point it was at risk of succumbing to the sea. Now, with that being said, since there's an inlet, it's bound to experience something called tides. Now, for those of you who aren't really sure what a tide is, it basically refers to changes in water level over time. And a lot of it has to do with gravitational force, or gravitational pull between the moon and even the earth itself. Tides are a very complicated subject, but that is the best way that I can really summarize what a tide exactly is. Now, tides are oftentimes categorized in two different ways, or actually three, excuse me. So the first type is your diurnal tide. So that basically means within a 24-hour cycle, there is a high tide and a low tide. So then, the second type is a semi-diurnal tide. So that means within a 24-hour cycle, there's up to 4 changes. So usually there are 2 low tides and then 2 high tides. That has like an equal depth. And then you got something called a mixed tide, which is sort of like a mixture between the semi-diurnal and the diurnal, just depending on perhaps the season or just the time of the year. And that usually along the Gulf Coast is what Florida experiences, is that mixed tide. And unfortunately, it looks like this water has a little bit of red tide too. But red tide is not related to the tides whatsoever. That's a whole separate subject referring to a harmful algal bloom. So just keep that in mind, mates. But yeah, you can just really see that water just going towards, and it's fast. I mean, you can see those, I don't know how well you guys can see them, but the pelicans that are sitting there, they are moving so quickly. But yeah. And oftentimes too, with inlets, there's also something called a ebb and flood tide. So basically, ebb refers to where water is flowing outwards into the sea. But then a flood tide is the opposite. It's where water from the sea floods its way into the harbor. And oftentimes, they both happen at the same exact time, too. So that's where I'm talking, like it creates those opposing currents. And thus, really, if you were to try swimming out there, even if you were a professional swimmer, you would be exhausted quickly and even risk drowning. So it's not worth it. So, and even there's signs like posted along the beach, like dangerous current, no swimming, please. Yeah. And then the island across from there is the Coriolis State Park. That's another barrier island state park. It's actually one of my goals is to explore that island, because you can't get there via automobile. The only way to get there is to have watercraft. I mean, yeah, you could kayak there, but you're gonna be fighting really, really hard. But yeah, it's just remarkable just how much activity is going on right now. And there's like, I don't know if you, way out in the distance, those are old remnants of, I believe, what used to be a pier, like a fishing pier. And there's just a whole flock of brown pelicans congregating together. Makes you wonder what they're talking about. Like, yeah, I think this Journey on a Journey guy is pretty cool for interpreting our work. But then they're probably always constantly thinking about food. What can they get next? Alright, you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and it provided some value to you guys. I mean, for any of you who navigate in the water, it's really important to know those types of tides and currents. So, not only that, but it also helps us understand like the types of fish that come through here and how a landscape is essentially formed over time. So Alright, you guys, enjoy your Wednesday, and Journey on a Journey is outwards. Take care, folks. See ya.